The storm came without mercy. Rain struck the city like grief falling from the sky, not in whispers, but in waves. Lightning carved silver scars into the night, each flash brief and violent, like a truth too bright to bear. At St. Aldan Medical Center, the world outside was nothing more than sound against glass. Inside, the air was still, heavy with antiseptic and silence. Clara Monroe stepped out of the operating room, her hands trembling faintly beneath latex gloves. She had just spent 12 hours in a fight against death, and for once, death had lost. A ruptured aorta, a heartbeat pulled back from the edge, another life saved, but there was no relief in her chest, only the familiar echo of something unfinished. Clara pulled down her mask. Her face was pale, drawn, but her eyes still held their fire, the kind that didn't flicker, even when the rest of her threatened to collapse. She was only 28, but already carried the weariness of someone older. Someone who had seen too much, lost too early, and never quite learned how to let go. She was the kind of woman who built walls with her work, who stitched up others because she hadn't yet figured out how to heal herself. Her mother had died in a hospital room like this one. A mistake, a misdiagnosis, a moment too late, and Clara had been there, helpless. A first-year medical student with trembling hands and a heart that never stopped blaming itself. Now, years later, she was the one saving lives, but inside, the guilt still beat steady. She had just collapsed into a chair in the dim break room when her phone buzzed against her thigh. Unknown number. She considered ignoring it, then answered, "Clara?" The voice on the other end was familiar but stripped bare. "Chief Langston," she said, sitting up. "I need you," he said, without preamble. "Now. The Seraphine Royale. Suite 3201. Come alone. No questions." Clara blinked. "Sir, no time," he cut her off. "Go, and Clara, be careful." The call ended before she could reply. All that remained was the flat, mechanical sound of a line gone cold. Outside, the rain was still falling, harder now. She pulled on her coat, still damp from earlier, and stepped into the storm. A cab appeared like something summoned from a dream, headlights glowing through the blur of water. Inside the car, the city blurred past. Velmora's skyline looked like it was crying light, bending behind glass, every building bleeding into the next. Clara stared out the window, but saw nothing. Chief Langston had never raised his voice in an operating room, even when lives were hanging by a thread. But tonight, there had been something else behind his words. Fear. When the cab pulled up to the Seraphine Royale, the rain let up just enough for her to see the building rise into the night like a cathedral. Marble columns. Gold trim. Light spilled from its windows like secrets refusing to stay hidden. At the door, a man in a black suit waited. He didn't speak. He simply turned and she followed. The halls inside were quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, but watched. Her heels clicked softly against the floor, the sound almost swallowed by the velvet of the walls. The elevator climbed slowly. The numbers blinked upward. 32, the doors opened. 32. She stepped into a different kind of silence, thicker, older. The suite was soaked in candlelight, crystal chandeliers sparkled above, but beneath the scent of sandalwood, something else lingered. Blood. A soft golden haze spilled from the chandelier above, casting a warm glow across the velvet and marble and over the man sitting silently in the red armchair. His chest was bare. The muscles beneath his skin were drawn tight, catching the light like sculpted stone. But it wasn't his strength that made Clara pause. It was the blood. A gash, deep and brutal, stretched from his collarbone to the edge of his ribs, bleeding in slow, steady rivulets. And yet, he sat still, calm, unmoving. Her breath caught, not from the wound she had seen worse, but from his eyes. Icy, blue, unreadable. They met hers without blinking, with a silence that felt more like a challenge than a plea. And he was beautiful in the way fire is beautiful. The kind of beauty you don't trust near oxygen. His dark hair was tousled, his jawline sharp, cut with the same precision that had likely earned him power. And then she knew, Rowan Vale, CEO of Vale International, one of Velmora's most elusive, most powerful men, and now, here he was bleeding, silent, watching her like a secret he wasn't ready to share. "Help me," he said, his voice low and steady, more like an order than a request. "And don't ask questions." Clara swallowed, her heart quickening. She lowered her bag, forcing professionalism into her limbs. "You need to lie down," she replied, surprised by how steady she sounded. His lips curled, not quite a smile, more a shadow of one, and then, without protest, he leaned back into the chair. She dropped to her knees beside him, snapping on gloves with hands that trembled slightly. Not from the blood, from him. His skin burned under her touch, feverish, far too warm for someone losing blood. She disinfected the wound, the scent of blood mixing with his cologne, sharp, expensive, unfamiliar, and suddenly, nothing felt sterile anymore. "This isn't superficial," she murmured, beginning the first suture. Her hands moved with precision, her thoughts less so. He watched her, not the way a patient watches a doctor, but the way someone studies a puzzle they almost remember. "Who did this to you?" she asked, not lifting her gaze. He didn't answer right away, just tilted his head, eyes never leaving hers. "You don't want to know, Dr. Monroe," he said finally, voice smooth and without apology. The way he said her name full, deliberate, sent a shiver across her shoulders. How did he know who I am? But she didn't ask. She just kept stitching, each pull of thread more careful than the last. This wasn't an accident. This cut had purpose. Someone wanted him silenced or warned. But Rowan Vale carried it like a man used to living with danger. When the final stitch was tied, Clara pressed gauze gently to the wound, her hand lingering longer than necessary. "All done," she said, rising, her voice forced into stillness. "You need rest." "No movement. No need," he replied quietly, already slipping his vest over the white bandage. A dark stain had already begun to spread across the fabric. He didn't seem to notice, or care. She watched him for a moment. There was something terrifying in how unafraid he was of pain, or maybe how familiar it was. "You won't tell me what happened?" she asked, her tone tinged with tired sarcasm. "Fine. Just know this, I won't be around to sew you up next time." A flicker sparked in his eyes. Amusement, but not dismissive. Deeper. "Do you care, Dr. Monroe?" he asked softly. "About what happens to me?" Clara's fingers froze as she reached for her tools. "No, of course not." She was a surgeon, a professional, that's all. But the question lodged somewhere inside her. She turned away, hiding the heat in her cheeks with motion. As she moved toward the door, he stepped closer. No words, no warning. His fingers brushed her wrist, not tightly, just enough for her to feel the strength beneath his calm, enough to remind her, this man wasn't just wounded, he was dangerous, and she wasn't sure which scared her more. "You've stepped into something dangerous, Clara," he whispered. Her name spoken for the first time without title felt strange in his mouth, soft, but edged like broken glass. His voice was barely above a murmur, yet it chilled her more than any scream. "Be careful." Clara pulled her hand from his, holding his gaze, trying to read something in those glacial eyes, but there was nothing. Only stillness. Only depth. "I don't play games," she said, her voice sharp as her scalpel. "And I don't respond well to threats." A real smile flickered on his lips, brief but unmistakable. "I'm not threatening you," Rowan replied, stepping back into shadow. "I'm just telling the truth." The door closed behind her with a sharp click. Outside, the storm had softened to a whisper, but inside her mind, the rain hadn't stopped. He remained where she left him, one hand brushing the bandage on his chest. Fresh blood stained his fingertips. He looked down, then up again, whispering into the silence. "She's not like the others," he said, and in his eyes, something glinted, not hope, not fear, but something ancient. Maybe she'll change everything, or burn it to the ground. 2 days passed. The city dried, the thunder faded, and Clara Monroe told herself it had all been a strange, surreal chapter now closed. She returned to her rhythm, long shifts, late nights, the smell of antiseptic and the endless beeping of machines that monitored life in numbers and pulses. But something inside her had shifted. Not a wound, not yet, but a weight like being watched by a shadow she couldn't see. At first, she blamed the memory of his voice, the cold certainty in his words. She told herself she was overthinking, that she didn't believe in secret games or whispered threats in hotel rooms. But then, things began to feel off. That afternoon, while crossing the street near the hospital, she noticed a man standing near the edge of the sidewalk. A baseball cap shaded his face, but his gaze direct, fixed, locked on her. He didn't move, didn't smile, and when she blinked, he was gone, vanished into the crowd like smoke. She shook her head, told herself it was nothing, stress, fatigue. But that night, as she walked home to her apartment on the quiet side of Grantham Hill, a sleek black car was idling across the street. It didn't honk, no one stepped out, but it stayed too long, long enough for her skin to prickle. "I'm just tired," she whispered to herself, rushing inside, but her heart said otherwise. Tuesday night. She was curled on her sofa, hair damp from a long shower, holding a cup of herbal tea between her palms. The silence was comforting until her phone lit up. Unknown number. The message was short, just 5 words. "You know too much." No punctuation, no name. The teacup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. She ran to the window, threw back the curtain. There, under the lamplight, was that same black car. Still, waiting, watching. Her breath came fast. Her hands shook. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was watching her, and she already knew who might be behind it, even if she didn't want to admit it. The next morning, she arrived at the hospital with dark circles under her eyes and a stethoscope that felt heavier than usual. She moved like someone sleepwalking, her mind crowded with questions that had no shape, only weight. Was Rowan involved? Was this his world bleeding into hers? What had he dragged her into? She was buttoning her blouse in the break room when the door opened. The room shifted. The air changed. Rowan Vale stepped in, dressed in black, his suit flawless, his presence impossible to ignore. But it was his face that stopped her breath, because for the first time, he looked concerned. "Clara," he said, his voice low, urgent. "You're in danger, because you saved me." She froze, fingers still clutching her stethoscope, and the world around her, every heartbeat, every footstep, every memory of that rainy night, suddenly made a kind of sense she didn't want. "What are you talking about?" Clara's voice was firm, but confusion threaded through it. Rowan stepped closer, closing the space between them before she could retreat. "There's no time to explain," he said, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "You have to come with me, now." Before she could react, his hand gripped her wrist. She yanked free, her eyes blazing. "I'm not moving until you tell me what this is," she snapped, but Rowan said nothing. He just looked at her, that same unreadable stare, then turned and walked down the hall without another word, like he already knew she'd follow. She stood frozen for a breath. Logic screamed, "Call security. Tell someone. Run." But the message flashed in her mind. "You know too much." And the black car. And that man on the sidewalk who vanished like mist. She clenched her jaw, then ran after him, the sound of her soft-soled shoes echoing across polished tile. Outside the emergency exit, a black SUV waited under the dull gleam of a street lamp. The passenger door stood open. "Get in," he said. This time, Clara didn't argue, but doubt clung to her like mist. The car surged forward through the rain-slicked streets of Velmora, the city lights blurring like memories. Clara sat in silence, gripping her seatbelt too tightly. "Tell me," she said, her voice sharp. "What kind of danger am I in, and what does it have to do with you?" Rowan kept his eyes on the road, but his voice dropped, quiet and cold. "My enemies don't forgive. I was attacked because I carry something they want, and because you kept me alive. You're not invisible anymore." Clara let out a dry, disbelieving laugh. "I stitched you up, that's all. I don't know anything." Before he could reply, the world shattered. A crash sharp and merciless. Glass exploded beside her head. The back window gone. A bullet embedded in the front seat, inches from her temple. Clara screamed, ducking low. Her pulse thundered. Her skin went cold. Rowan didn't flinch. He gripped the wheel, eyes fierce. The SUV surged forward, weaving through traffic like a blade through fabric. "Still think it's a joke?" he said, his voice rough with urgency. She didn't answer, couldn't. Her breath came fast, hands braced against the dashboard. The echo of glass breaking still rang in her ears. She wasn't in control anymore, and for the first time, she knew it. "Who are they?" she asked finally, her voice trembling but determined to hold. Rowan didn't look at her. "They're the kind of people who kill to keep secrets buried," he said. "And now, Clara, you're part of that secret whether you asked for it or not." The city lights began to fade as the SUV veered off the main roads, deeper into the outskirts. The trees thickened, darkness folding in like curtains. Eventually, the car slowed. A steel gate loomed ahead, surrounded by trees and silence. Beyond it stood a house, no, a fortress made of dark glass and stone, cold, modern, unwelcoming. Rowan killed the engine and turned to her. The worry that had once flickered in his eyes was gone, replaced by something colder. And yet, there was something else beneath it, something she couldn't name. "Welcome to my world, Clara," he said, his voice low, final. "There's no turning back." Clara stared at him, then at the house. The place looked like it belonged to someone who didn't expect to be safe, only untouchable. She wanted to argue, to demand to be taken back. But the memory of shattered glass, the whine of the bullet, it silenced her. She stepped out of the car. A wind cut through the trees, damp and sharp, carrying the scent of rain and soil, and something else. A warning, a shift. Rowan stood beside her, tall, still, a shadow carved from control. And she knew then, the line between her old life and this one had already been crossed. Chapter 5. His world. The mansion loomed ahead, dark glass and steel rising from the earth like a secret meant to be kept. Beyond the edge of Velmora, far from the hum of city streets, a house emerged from the shadows, like something half-remembered in a dream. Its towering glass walls caught the moonlight in sharp slivers, cold and beautiful, reflecting back a world that never felt safe. Clara stood still at the entrance, her breath catching as the steel gate shut behind her with a mechanical hiss. The wind moved through the trees above, carrying the scent of wet leaves and secrets long buried, a forest that whispered things you weren't meant to hear. Her white-soled shoes, still damp from the night's escape, left faint prints on the black marble floor. Inside, the space glowed in soft LED light, sleek, modern, and precise. But to Clara, it felt less like a home and more like a lair, a place designed for someone who expected enemies, not guests. Rowan walked ahead in silence, not looking back. His presence filled the space, like he belonged to its every line and shadow. Clara followed, and the automatic door shut behind her with a click that felt far too final, as if it had just sealed off the last exit from her old life. The living room stretched out before her, all clean lines and cold beauty. Black leather, a glass fireplace flickering low, and above it, a large painting red slashed through black like blood running through smoke. It made her think of the wound on his shoulder, of that first night. "This is your home?" she asked, her voice dry, unsure whether she was speaking to ease the silence or convince herself she was still in control. Rowan didn't look at her. "This is where I disappear," he replied simply. At a small bar, he poured himself a drink but didn't sip it. Instead, he set the glass on the table, then glanced at her, expression unreadable. "Sit. You need rest." Clara bristled at the command, but her legs, heavy from fear and fatigue, didn't argue. She sat, clutching her medical bag like a lifeline. Time passed strangely in that place stretched thin between silence and words that came in quiet drops. He began to talk. Not much, but enough. He told her who he was, not the headlines, not the curated image in glossy magazines, but the man behind the empire. Rowan Vale, CEO of Vale International, a company built on data, algorithms, artificial intelligence technology, meant to shape the future. But there was another world beneath the one they showed the public. A darker network of corporate warfare, stolen secrets, enemies who wore designer suits and smiled as they planned your downfall. "They want what I have," he said, his fingers absently turning the untouched whiskey glass, "and they'll burn the world to get it." Clara studied him. There was something almost painful about how composed he was, as if calm had become his only armor. And for a moment, when he stood by the window, hands in his pockets, moonlight sliding over his face, she saw it. The solitude, the weight. His blue eyes stared into the trees like he wasn't really seeing them. "Don't you ever get tired?" she asked quietly. "Of running? Of pretending?" He turned slowly, his gaze meeting hers, and then for the first time he smiled. Not smug, not amused. A small, fleeting thing. "Sad. Tired," he said. "But I stopped having a choice a long time ago." Later, the mood shifted. Without a word, Rowan disappeared into a space tucked behind the living room, a kitchen she hadn't noticed before. She heard the sound of a knife against wood, the soft hiss of a pan, the quiet bubbling of water. Then the faint scent of sautéed garlic and herbs floated into the air. And Clara sat alone in that fortress of glass and steel, realizing she was no longer just patching a wound on a stranger. She was slipping into something much more dangerous and much harder to leave. The scent of garlic drifted through the air, warm, grounding, unexpected. Clara stepped out of the dim living room and leaned against the kitchen doorway, watching the man who, just hours earlier, had pulled her from gunfire and shadows. "What are you doing?" she asked softly. Rowan turned toward her, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his vest discarded. The lines of muscle across his forearms caught the soft kitchen light. "Cooking," he said simply, as if that answer made sense in a night like this. Before her sat a modest plate spaghetti with tomato, garlic, and herbs. Not extravagant, not chef-crafted, just warm, honest. "I don't have a private chef," Rowan added, setting the plate down in front of her, "and I figured you hadn't eaten." Clara blinked, then sat. Her heart stirred, not because of the food, though it tasted better than she expected, but because of him. This man, once distant, cold, now barefoot in his own kitchen, feeding the woman who'd stitched his wound. "Why?" she asked. The question came quieter than she meant it to. He sat across from her, the glass of whiskey untouched between his fingers, turning slowly. "Because I want you to see," he said. "I'm not just what the world says I am." Then, almost without transition, he spoke of his work. Not the headlines, the real thing. An artificial intelligence project. Something ambitious, dangerous. Not designed to dominate, but to protect. To keep the last pieces of the world from falling apart, he said. Not grandly, not to impress. Just, truthfully. Clara ate slowly, letting the warmth of the food bleed into her bones. They didn't speak much, but enough. Enough for her to hear the weight in his voice when he spoke of the company he built from the ground up. The choices he'd made, the lives tied to every decision. He didn't say the word lonely, but she heard it. And for the first time since that first night, she didn't see him as a threat. She saw a man burdened, brilliant, and bleeding. First beneath the surface. Later, she stepped out onto the narrow balcony. The trees swayed beneath a silver sky. The moonlight laced through their branches like threads through old fabric. Rowan joined her quietly, closer than he'd stood before. Not looming, not forceful, just present. She felt the warmth of him beside her, even before she saw his hand reach up slow, deliberate, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You're not like anyone I've ever known, Clara," he said. His breath was warm against her skin, his voice softer now, deeper. She turned toward him, heart thudding against her ribs, and when her gaze met his, the blue in his eyes had shifted no longer ice, but something vast, gentle, wounded. She didn't speak, and he didn't move closer. He stepped back, offering space, but his eyes stayed on her, like a promise left unsaid, and in that breath of silence between them she felt it. The thread, thin, invisible, but real enough to make her wonder if she could still walk away. The wind whispered through the trees, and Clara knew she wasn't just visiting his world anymore. She was already part of it. It happened without warning. The moon still hung above the trees. The night still smelled of pine and rain. But suddenly, the ground trembled beneath her feet. Clara had only a second to understand. Then came the blast, a thunderous crack, the kind that doesn't echo, it consumes. The glass wall behind her shattered. A storm of shards burst into the living room, catching the light as they scattered like knives across marble. She stumbled, grabbing the balcony railing for balance as smoke and dust surged up from below. Her ears rang, her lungs stung. Then a voice through the chaos. "Clara, get down!" Rowan, somewhere inside the haze. The fortress was no longer safe. And Clara, for all her stubborn belief in control, realized she had crossed into a world where danger didn't knock. It detonated. She ran, bare feet on broken glass, each step sliced into her skin, blood blooming beneath her with every stride, but she didn't feel it, couldn't. All she saw was Rowan, trapped beneath a jagged sheet of the shattered window, blood pouring again from the wound on his shoulder. His face was pale, but his eyes, they still burned with that same impossible fire. "Rowan." Clara dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she gripped the heavy glass and heaved it off his body. Blood soaked through his shirt, vivid and warm against her fingers. "Don't move," she ordered, her voice low but ironclad, forged from the years she'd spent saving lives in quieter rooms. But then gunshots. A sudden burst from the front of the house, loud, ruthless, final. Clara screamed and dragged Rowan behind the overturned sofa, using it as cover. Bullets ripped through the air, splintering wood and slicing plaster, a storm of destruction that turned the silence to ash. Dust fell like snow. Her ears rang, and still she reached for her bag. "Don't!" Rowan rasped, grabbing her wrist, his hands slick with blood. But Clara yanked free, her eyes blazing. "I'm not letting you die," she snapped. She dropped flat, crawling through the debris, glass slicing into her palms. A bullet tore through her shoulder heat, then ice, her blouse ripped. She didn't stop. She reached the bag, she crawled back, and then back to work. The doctor returned. With blood on her skin and fire in her eyes, Clara opened the bag, tore on gloves, and began. She pressed her hands against the wound, her voice shaky but steady. "Stay with me." Rowan's breathing was ragged, but he never cried out. Just watched her pain written across his face, but behind it, something else. Wonder, trust. She found the gauze, pressed it hard, reached for the thread. Her fingers flew, precise, ruthless, fast. The bullets slowed, then stopped. But she didn't. Every stitch was a promise. Every pull of the thread was defiance. "You've got this," Rowan whispered. His voice was faint, but sure, like he wasn't talking just about the wound anymore. Outside, engines roared, tires peeled away on gravel. And then, silence. The intruders were gone. But the house had changed. It wasn't a fortress anymore. It was a graveyard of illusions. Clara slumped to the floor, her hands slick with blood, his and her own. Her chest heaved, her shoulder throbbed, but her eyes were fixed on him. "What is this?" she shouted. The calm she'd clung to finally shattered. "What is happening to me?" Rowan reached for her hand. His was cold, but his grip was strong. "I have something they want," he said slowly. "Evidence of what they've done, corruption, murder, all of it. I've held it, protected it. They won't stop unless I give it up. Or I die." Clara's breath caught. Evidence, crimes, people who killed to stay in the shadows. She had wanted to save a man, not inherit his war. She wanted clean lines, clear choices, not this. But then she thought of the bullet that missed her in the car, the explosion that tore through glass just minutes ago, the blood, hot, heavy, still drying on her hands. And she knew she wasn't outside of this anymore. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered. Rowan's eyes fluttered closed, his chest rising with effort. "Because I didn't want you to be afraid," he murmured. "I didn't want you to run." Clara stared at him. The man who once stood untouchable, unbreakable, now lay before her, wounded and whispering, his hand still gripping hers like it was the only thing holding him to this world. He wasn't stone. He wasn't steel. He was real, raw, bleeding, and quietly asking to be seen. "You didn't have to stay," he said, his voice rough. "You didn't have to do any of this." But she was already here, and she wasn't letting go. He tried to push her away to shield her from whatever came next, but Clara gripped his hand tighter. "I don't leave people behind," she said. Her voice was steady, even as adrenaline raced through her veins, even as the air reeked of smoke and blood. In that breathless pause, amid shattered glass and flickering shadows, something shifted between them. It wasn't spoken, but it was felt. He looked at her broken, bleeding, but unyielding, and she looked at him powerful, wounded, yet still trying to protect her. His icy eyes softened, the fortress around them cracking for the first time. "Thank you," Rowan whispered, his fingers brushing the back of her hand, a fleeting touch, but it made her heart skip. And then the sirens. Red and blue lit the darkness. A chorus of urgency and consequence. Rowan's eyes snapped open, sharpening. "We have to go," he said, trying to rise. Clara slid her arm beneath his shoulders, her body trembling from exhaustion, but strong enough to hold him. "Go where?" she asked, her voice edged with panic. "Anywhere," he answered, teeth clenched. "Anywhere but here. I'm not letting you die for me." They moved together, two silhouettes half stumbling, half running across a floor streaked with both their blood. The world they'd known had collapsed behind them, glass crunching under their steps as they left it behind. Outside, Rowan led her to a garage tucked behind the mansion. A black off-road vehicle waited, engine already humming like it, too, was trying to flee. He nearly collapsed into the driver's seat, blood soaking the bandage at his shoulder, but still managed to growl, "Get in." Clara didn't hesitate. She climbed in, and the car tore into the forest, gravel scattering like ash in their wake. Through the rearview mirror, she saw the lights of the approaching police. But Rowan never looked back. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white beneath blood-streaked skin. His jaw clenched. His silence said everything. "Where are we going now?" she asked. Her voice wasn't afraid anymore, just tired, resigned, a quiet acceptance that she'd already stepped too far into this. He glanced at her not long, just enough, and she saw it, the pain, the vow, the unspoken apology. "Somewhere they can't find us," he said, his voice low, steady. "I'll keep you safe." And in that moment, a promise whispered between wounds and trees. Clara knew. There was no turning back, not from him, not from this world. Hours later, the car rolled to a stop before a small weathered cottage nestled near the sea, far from city lights, far from gunfire and steel gates. The only sound was the hush of waves brushing against the sand, as if the ocean itself was trying to lull them into peace. Clara stepped out first. The cold sand kissed her bare feet, a quiet, grounding touch after so much chaos. For the first time in days, she could breathe. The air smelled like salt and pine, and the stars, undimmed by buildings or smoke, shimmered above like tiny beacons of forgiveness. The house was unlike any place Rowan had taken her before. No sharp edges, no glass walls, no alarms, just weathered wood, faded by wind and time. A porch with 2 rocking chairs that creaked softly when the breeze passed through. Inside, a single lamp cast golden light over a small table and mismatched chairs. It didn't feel like a hideout. It felt like a home someone once loved and still remembered. Rowan walked in behind her, his movement slower now, each one echoing exhaustion. He dropped the keys on the table, then pulled off his blood-streaked coat with a tired exhale. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was healing. Rowan peeled off his vest, revealing the dusty bandage on his shoulder, a quiet reminder of everything they had barely survived. "This place is mine," he said, voice lower now, gentler. "No one else knows about it." Clara simply nodded, no questions, no pressing. Just silence, warm and accepting, as she sank into one of the old chairs on the porch, letting the stillness breathe into her for the first time in days. Time passed differently there. Rowan had found an old bottle of red wine tucked behind some dusty tins in the kitchen. Despite the tremor in his hands, he poured 2 glasses and carried them out to the porch. They sat side by side in the rocking chairs. The waves whispered in the distance, and for once, they didn't speak of danger, or evidence, or enemies. Instead, they let the silence soften. And then, piece by piece, they began to speak. Not as fugitives, but as people. "My father died when I was a kid," Rowan said, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sea met the stars. "They said it was a car accident. Maybe it was. Maybe not. My mother tried to raise me, but the pressure from my family, it crushed her." He paused, the glass turning slowly in his hand. "I inherited everything at 22, not because I wanted to, but because there was no one else. People think I craved power. I didn't. I just wanted to survive." Clara listened, her heart tightening. He wasn't the titan she saw in headlines. He was a boy, forced to grow up inside a cage made of legacy and expectations, and she understood that cage too well. "My mother died in front of me," Clara said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "A hospital mistake. I was a first-year med student. I couldn't stop it. Couldn't do anything." She set her glass down slowly. "I swore that night I'd never lose someone like that again. That's why I became a doctor." Rowan turned to her then, not with pity, just understanding. The kind of look you only give someone who's bled in the same way. And in that look, something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not rescue, recognition. Later that night, they stepped off the porch and into the cool embrace of the sand. The stars were diamonds flung across a velvet sky. The moonlight painted everything silver. Clara stood at the edge of the shore, hair dancing in the breeze. Rowan came up behind her, closer than before. He didn't speak, just lifted a hand, gently tucking a wind-blown strand behind her ear. She turned toward him. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to still. Then, wordlessly, he pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, resting against the strength of him, feeling the thud of his heart through the thin fabric between them. His lips found hers not with urgency, but reverence. The kiss was slow, tender, fierce in its quietness. The kind that says, "I see you," not the surface, the soul. Salt from the sea mingled with breath and skin, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. When they pulled apart, Clara rested her head against his chest. His hand threaded gently through her hair, and they stood there, wrapped in the silence of something real. "I never thought I'd find this," Rowan murmured. His voice was rough, like gravel softened by wind. "Find what?" she asked, lifting her eyes. He looked down at her, gaze steady, stripped of every wall. "You," he said. They stood beneath the sky, waves echoing their heartbeats, wrapped in something fragile but undeniable. For the first time, Clara felt safe, not from the world, but within herself. And yet, just as the warmth crept into her bones, just as she let herself believe that peace might stay, something stirred in the distance. And the moment cracked. Warmth. It lingered in the curve of his arms around her, in the softness of the kiss he pressed to her forehead, a vow whispered without words. But even as Clara held on to him, something cold flickered at the edge of her thoughts. A sharp, silent question, will this last? She didn't speak it, only tightened her hold on him, as if she could keep the moment from slipping away if she just held still enough. That night, they sat on the sand shoulder to shoulder, hands clasped, letting the hush of the waves and the glow of the stars wrap around them. No secrets, no shadows, just Clara and Rowan. Two people caught in the eye of a storm, daring to feel something real. And yet, even in that perfect silence, the question lingered. Was this happiness truly hers, or just a dream passing through before the nightmare returned? Morning came softly. The seaside cottage looked almost too peaceful under the golden sun, as if danger had never touched its wooden frame. But the wind changed. A sudden chill swept through, brushing against Clara's skin like a premonition she couldn't name. She stood in the kitchen, coaxing an old coffee machine to life, the scent of roasted beans curling into the air. On the porch, Rowan sat his phone pressed to his ear, his gaze fixed on the horizon. She smiled faintly. Last night felt like a turning point, like a fragile promise. And for the first time, she thought maybe they'd found a place they could just be. But then, his voice, low, tense, measured. "I need information from St. Alden," he said. The name struck her like a slap. Her hospital, her second home, where she had saved lives, where she had given everything. "Yes, I know the risk," Rowan continued, unaware of her presence, "but we need that data, even if it costs us." Clara froze. The cup in her hand trembled. Coffee sloshed over the edge, and then it slipped. Glass shattered on the wooden floor, the sound sharp and immediate. Rowan turned, eyes wide just for a moment before the calm slid back into place. "Clara," he said quickly, ending the call. But it was too late. "What did you just say?" she asked. Her voice was shaking now, not from fear, but from something deeper. Betrayal. He stepped toward her, lifting a hand like he could smooth this over. "It's not what you think." "Trust you?" she cut in, stepping back. Her gaze burned into him. "You were talking about my hospital, my work, everything I believe in a secret call, and I was supposed to just stand there and trust you?" He opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. "What is this, Rowan?" Her voice cracked. "Was I just a means to an end for you? A doctor who could patch you up and give you access?" Each word sliced at her, harsher than the gunfire, more painful than the wound on her shoulder. He shook his head, took a step forward, but she raised her hand like a barrier. "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't come closer, not until you tell me the truth." Rowan stood there, silent, still, and that silence broke something inside her. She needed truth. Not more walls, not more shadows. Finally, he spoke, voice low, almost pleading. "I can't tell you everything, not yet, but I swear to you, I'm not." But she had already turned away, and somewhere between the crashing of the cup and the stillness of his voice, something between them had cracked, not beyond repair, but no longer whole. "I would never do anything to hurt you." Clara's bitter laugh broke the silence, tears gathering yet held back by sheer resolve. "Don't hurt me. You dragged me into this damned world. You got me shot at, hunted, and now you're using my hospital for some scheme I know nothing about. I trusted you, Rowan." Her voice rang out, shattering the fragile calm as her fists clenched in disbelief. "I trusted you with my life." Rowan stood there, motionless, his face ashen. He offered no defense. In a sudden burst of fury, Clara spun around and stormed inside. Her trembling hands swept up everything she could carry. Her medical bag, her jacket, every small token of a life built on care and sacrifice. "Clara, don't!" Rowan called after her, his voice echoing down the narrow living room. "But you don't understand stepping out now is suicide. They're still hunting us." Yet she wouldn't listen. Slipping on her shoes, she turned to face him one last time. Her eyes blazed with pain and disillusionment. "I'd rather face them than stay here with someone I can't trust." Her words, icy and final, cut deeper than any bullet. With that, she flung open the door and stepped out, not looking back, even though her heart felt shattered. The cold sand pressed against her bare feet, the sea breeze whipping through her hair, carrying the salt of unshed tears. Knowing full well the peril that awaited her, she still called a taxi from a nearby town and climbed in. As the car wound its way along the coastal road, she watched through the window as Rowan's figure on the porch shrank, vanishing around a bend in the now deserted house. Inside, Rowan remained alone. His hand still gripped the phone until his knuckles turned white. He stared out at the sea, where the morning sun shone bright, yet all he saw was darkness. "I didn't want to lose you," he whispered, his voice breaking in the silence. He slammed his fist against the wall, the sharp echo a testament to the agony inside him. He had hidden the truth, not to deceive her, but to shield her from a terrible secret data from the hospital linked to an illegal medical trial orchestrated by his enemies. Evidence of corruption and murder that they would kill to seize. At that moment, Rowan realized he had lost the one person who ever made him feel less alone. Clara, huddled in the taxi, clutched her medical bag as silent tears streamed down her face. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to return to New York and reclaim her own life, no matter the danger. Images of Rowan, the kiss beneath the stars, the dinner he had cooked, the distant, haunted gaze flashed in her mind. But now they were just a deep wound, a betrayal too heavy to bear. She had given him everything, trusted him implicitly, and he had concealed a secret tied to her very existence. "How foolish I was," she murmured, wiping her tears, though the pain remained. The taxi sped along winding roads, carrying her away from the seaside refuge and from Rowan. She didn't know whether this choice would lead to safety or to death, but she couldn't stay, couldn't bear the betrayal a moment longer. Outside, the sky remained bright, yet within her lay a night with no escape. And Rowan, alone in the empty house, stared at the chair where she had once sat, knowing he had just lost the only person who ever made him feel truly whole. Clara stepped out of the taxi in front of her modest Brooklyn apartment. Dim streetlights cast a gentle glow over the quiet block. It had been 2 days since she left the seaside retreat, since she abandoned Rowan and his lies. Exhaustion weighed on her. Dark circles shadowed her sleepless eyes, and her heart bore the sting of betrayal. Yet, as she inserted her key into the lock, an unexpected sound caught her attention. The sound echoed behind her sharp, purposeful steps on the pavement. Clara turned instinctively, but before she could react, a rough hand clamped over her mouth, yanking her into the alley beside her building. Her medical bag hit the ground with a metallic crash, echoing through the empty street. She fought, nails digging, limbs flailing, until a brutal blow struck the side of her head, and the world slipped into black. Miles away, back at the seaside house, Rowan stood frozen. The news had just come through. "She's been taken," the voice on the other end of the call said. "They know where she is." He didn't speak, just crushed his fist into the table, glass shattered, shards embedded into his skin. He didn't even flinch. "It's a trap," the hacker warned. "They want you to come. That's the point." Rowan ended the call without answering. He grabbed his keys and ran. He knew it was a setup, but he also knew this. If Clara died, nothing else would matter. She awoke in darkness, cold metal beneath her, hands bound tightly behind her back, duct tape silencing her screams. Her head throbbed, dry blood crusted at her temple. But her eyes, they burned. All around her were men in black, 5 of them, faces covered, guns raised. One knelt before her, his voice gravelly and cruel. "You're the bait," he said with a smirk. "Blake comes for you. We end him." Clara stared him down. No words, but pure fury roared behind her silence. She wasn't afraid. She was furious. Furious at Rowan, furious at herself, furious at the world for turning her into a pawn. Outside, an engine screamed. Then, the warehouse doors exploded inward. Rowan's off-road vehicle slammed through the iron frame, sending metal flying. He leapt out, no armor, no backup, just rage in his eyes and blood in his heart. Bullets flew. He didn't hesitate. He moved like wind, like shadow, like something wild. He tackled the first man, wrestled the gun from his hands, and fired. The second dropped. A shot caught him in the shoulder, his wounded shoulder. Blood sprayed. But he didn't fall. He kept going. Clara watched, screaming behind the tape, eyes wide with disbelief and dread. He was bleeding for her. Again. Still. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Every punch pure fire. Every shot pure will. A knife flashed. He twisted, slammed an elbow into the attacker's jaw. Another bullet tore through his leg. He dropped to his knees, gasping, trembling, but his eyes still locked on hers. "I'll get you out," he roared, his voice raw, cracked open by pain and purpose. And with one final, defiant shot, the last assassin fell. Silence returned. Rowan dragged himself toward her, leaving a trail of blood behind. He dropped to her side, shaking hands, cutting the ropes. Clara ripped the tape from her mouth and let out a broken breath. Then she caught him just in time as he collapsed into her arms. "Rowan," she cried, her voice torn and full. Tears spilled over her cheeks as she held him close, feeling the terrifying warmth of his blood soaking into her clothes. He leaned into her shoulder, voice barely a whisper. "Let's go." And in that moment, she knew. He hadn't just risked his life to save her. He'd given it. His knees buckled, and they collapsed together onto the cold warehouse floor, her arms instinctively wrapping around him, trying to hold up what was slipping through her fingers. "Don't you die on me," Clara sobbed, her trembling hands pressing into the wound on his shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. "I can't lose you. Not now." Rowan looked at her, his deep blue eyes dulled by blood loss, but they still held something. A flicker of warmth, of life. His fingers brushed her cheek, leaving a streak of red. "I love you," he whispered, his voice cracked, raw and fading. "I've loved you since that first night." The words hit her like a thunderclap to the heart. Clara broke. Tears streamed freely down her face, falling onto his chest and mixing with his blood. "I love you too," she whispered back, her voice breaking. Not because of his words, but because of what he had done. Because he came back. Because he chose her, even if it meant dying. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, her lips trembling against his burning skin. "Don't leave me," she begged, her hands clenching his like lifelines. "You don't get to leave me." He tried to smile, weak, lopsided, barely there. His hands slipped to the floor, but his eyes never left hers, as if he was memorizing her face, for whatever came next. Clara snapped into action, one hand refusing to let go of his, the other clawing through her medical bag for gauze, coagulants, anything that might buy him more time. She didn't care about the sirens screaming in the distance, or the red and blue lights flashing through the warehouse cracks. She didn't hear the boots storming in. All she cared about was him. The police found them like that, Clara cradling Rowan, blood covering them both. But her tears had stopped. Her hands were steady, and her eyes burned not with fear, but with purpose. "You're going to live," she whispered to him, brushing sweat-drenched hair from his forehead, "because I won't let you go." He didn't speak, but his fingers twitched, a faint squeeze, a silent vow. He was still fighting. Sirens still wailed as the medics worked on Rowan, rushing him into the ambulance. Clara rode beside him, her hands still red with his blood. She never let go. At the hospital, when the police tried to question her, Clara refused arrest. She was the only one qualified to oversee what Rowan needed next, and she wasn't leaving his side until he made it out of that surgery alive. Outside the operating room, she stood like stone, eyes locked through the glass, not moving, not blinking. And when he was wheeled out alive but unconscious, she let out the first breath she dared to hold. They'd made it. Barely. When Rowan finally woke, pale and weak but breathing, he turned his head toward her. His hand found hers. His voice, gravelly. "Give it to them. Finish this." Clara didn't flinch. From the pocket of his jacket, she retrieved the small USB, the piece of evidence he had risked everything for. Documents, videos, signed reports, proof. She contacted a detective she trusted, an old contact from a past case. Honest, steady, the kind of man who still believed in justice. That night, at the precinct, she handed it all over. Her voice calm, clear, steady. Vidian Corp conducted illegal drug trials on patients at St. Alden Hospital, Rowan said from the hospital bed, his voice faint but fierce. They killed to cover it up, and they came for me, because I had this. The truth was no longer in the shadows, and neither were they. The days that followed were a blur of motion. The authorities moved quickly: raids, arrests, confessions. The USB drive Clara had delivered ignited a full-blown investigation. Within 48 hours, the NYPD stormed Vidian Corporation's towering Manhattan headquarters. What they uncovered was staggering forged documents, embezzled millions, hidden medical trials, hundreds of lives used as experiments, executives on tape, voices flat, factual as they confessed to everything. At the press conference that followed, Clara stood beside Rowan. Flashbulbs exploded around them like fireworks. Reporters called their names. Cameras captured the contrast: her white coat, his black suit. 2 survivors, 2 whistleblowers, 2 hearts that refused to be broken. The CEO of Vidian Corporation, Victor Kane, has been taken into custody along with multiple senior officers, the detective announced. And it's because of these 2. The applause began. But Clara only looked at Rowan, and he looked at her. And in that glance, there was no spotlight, no press, just 2 people who had made it through fire and still found their way back to each other. Later, in the quiet of his hospital room, Rowan sat upright in bed, bandages still wrapped around his shoulder. Clara sat beside him, their hands gently entwined. A soft smile curved his lips. Not guarded, not amused, just warm. "We did it," she said, her voice hushed. He nodded, giving her hand a small squeeze. "We're free now," he whispered, not as a statement, but as a promise. Outside, New York pulsed with light and sound. But inside that quiet room, it was only them. 2 broken souls, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. And as she rested her head against his shoulder, Clara finally let herself believe the nightmare had passed. They had found their peace. 3 months later, Clara Monroe stepped into the same private suite at the Waldorf Astoria where the story had first begun. But everything had changed. There were no shadows now, no blood, no fear. Only golden light cascading through silk curtains, white roses blooming on every table, and the soft hum of violins filling the air like a whispered lullaby. She wore a pale green silk dress, simple, graceful. Her hair flowed freely down her back, her eyes bright as stars. And there he stood, Rowan Vale, in a sharp black suit. His gaze locked onto hers the moment she entered, like nothing else in the world mattered. Before she could speak, he stepped forward and dropped to one knee. A ring box opened in his hand, a single diamond catching the light. "You saved me, Clara," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just that night, every day since. Now let me spend my life protecting you, loving you. Will you marry me?" Clara's breath caught. Tears welled, but her answer came in a trembling whisper. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. She pulled him into her arms. And in that room where death had once knocked, they kissed soft and sure, not as survivors, but as soulmates. Their wedding took place a month later on the beach where they had once found each other. As the sun sank low, casting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Clara walked barefoot across the sand. Her white dress flowed behind her like a memory. Each step was light, each breath steady. Rowan stood waiting in white, his gaze never leaving hers. And in the breeze, among the waves, they promised each other forever. The waves murmured in time with their vows, like the sea itself was bearing witness. "I promise to love and protect you," Rowan said, "no matter what comes." Their rings slid into place, glinting in the sunlight. Applause rang out from friends, from colleagues, from strangers who had become part of their journey. But in that moment, all Clara saw was him, and all Rowan saw was her, two souls that had once been lost, now forever found. That night, under a sky strewn with stars, they danced barefoot on the sand. Her laughter mingled with the soft rhythm of the ocean and the low warmth of his voice. "You're breathtaking," Rowan whispered, pulling her close. Clara rested her head against his chest, her hand pressed to the beat of his heart. "You're not so bad yourself," she teased. They both laughed, a sound light and real, echoing softly across the water. The celebration stretched past midnight, but when the guests drifted away, they remained. Just the two of them, hand in hand, walking to the water's edge. The moonlight shimmered across the surface. They stood in silence, fingers laced, hearts wide open. "Whatever comes," Rowan said, his voice steady, "we'll face it together." Clara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Together. They kissed slow, deep, and full of promise, a vow without ceremony, but stronger than any spoken before. When they returned to the cottage, the same small seaside house that had once been a hiding place, now their home, Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, smiling. "We made it," she whispered. Rowan kissed her hair and replied, "And we'll make so much more." That night, they fell asleep in each other's arms. No fear, no running, just the sound of waves whispering through the open window. And for the first time, both believed it. This happiness was real, and this time, it was forever. Forever. Thank you for staying with this story through every heartbeat, every moment of pain and courage, every quiet victory of love. If you believe, like we do, that true love can survive anything, and that sometimes it begins in the simplest of ways, we invite you to share this story. Hit like, comment your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt journeys. Let's keep telling stories that remind us that even in the darkest corners, kindness, courage, and love always find their way home. From the Shining Stories channel, thank you for being part of this journey.